Thank you for everyone for being here. Almost everything I thought I knew about leadership is wrong. That's a pretty amazing statement for someone who's been a professor of management for 20 years and is now a dean of a business school. But almost everything I thought I knew about management and leadership, I no longer believe. You know, it started with the idea that the leader's in control, and the leader is heading up this organization where everything's stable and it's calm waters, and that if there's conflict or there's turmoil, the leader must not be in control. I don't think that's true anymore. You know, you've heard also the leader has the vision, and it's supposed to be a big, bold vision. You know, I guess we're all supposed to be Steve Jobs. I don't think that's really true of most leaders anymore. And the other thing you've heard is that leaders are people who solve big problems. They figure out what the organizational fix is, and they provide it. And once again, after 20 years of studying organizations and leadership, I've come to the conclusion that that's probably not really the way it is. So what's the basis for me saying what I'm going to say today? How did I get to this point? Well, I'm going to share with you a little bit about two organizations, my journey through two of them. One's a very untypical organization that a social scientist, a management professor would study. But I did some research in a church, a downtown church in a large city in the Southwest, and I'm going to call it Mission Church. And I'm going to tell you the story of Mission Church. It was a dying church, and the turnaround that happened there defied everything I just said to you about what makes leaders. The other organization that I've journeyed through, I'm in the journey through this organization, is a building you see here, some of you know, it's the College of Business here at the University of Nebraska, where I'm the dean. And I'm going to reflect a little bit, because some of my experiences there also tell me that those same three things I just said I don't think are true, the same thing holds for my experiences there. So let me begin to tell you a story. And all stories start with, once upon a time, there was a church. It was a big church at one time. It's almost 200 years old. I'm going to call it Mission Church. It's situated deep in the heart of a metropolitan area. At one time, it was what they called a silk stockings church. The affluent people went to this church. Judges and lawyers and doctors and professors and successful business people made up this congregation. The ministers who served the church went on to be bishops. It was a very famous church in its denomination and in that region of the country. But like many downtown churches, it began to experience, slowly, some of its members began to move to the suburbs. And so at the time I came to know this church and was involved in a research study there, it had been in decline for 50 years. A number of ministers had come and gone, all trying to save it, couldn't do it. At the time that me and my research team were part of involved in studying this organization, it had just had appointed two new pastors. They were actually a husband and wife team, so co-pastors. They'd been there about 2 years. These people were known in their denomination for starting churches, for revitalizing churches. If anyone could do it, these two could. In fact, basically, they'd been sent there to either revive it or probably shut it down. They'd been there, like I said, 2 years when we arrived. And the church was in the midst of controversy. What you see here is a line of homeless people, street people, outside the church waiting for the day center to open. But I'm getting ahead of this story. Let me back up just a minute. The ministers had tried everything, every known prescription for saving a dying church. They'd had the congregation reading books on how to turn around a dying church. They'd come up with the vision. They'd given the vision to people. They'd had strategic planning retreats, and still the decline continued. And with people leaving went the pocketbooks. And so the church was in financial stress as well. One evening over dinner, some young people, young professionals who started coming to this church, started tossing around an idea about what are we going to do on Sunday morning? We're not going to Sunday school. They didn't want to do that. They thought that seemed boring. And someone said, you know, why don't we either serve breakfast to those? There's a lot of street people walking around the building. Now, this same church, when the co-pastors had arrived there, found this big, beautiful mausoleum of a church, had been locking its doors and had installed security cameras because it was kind of dangerous with strangers coming in. The symbolism isn't missed on any of us, I don't think, is here's the church and the doors are locked. So the ministers had said, no, we're opening the doors. And that didn't make some people too happy. But here they were, they tried everything. This young group said, okay, and they asked the ministers, do you care if on Sunday morning some of us get together and serve breakfast downstairs in the kitchen? They said, that sounds fine to us, but you know, we don't have any money in the budget. You'll have to figure it out yourself. So with their own donations, they gathered, they planned their breakfast for about 5 weeks. They passed out little flyers. You wouldn't consider them too sophisticated, but they were little flyers. This is my marketing person right here. Little flyers they handed, and you know, on the first Sunday, they opened the door of their cafe, and they decided, we're going to do this differently. We're going to sit down and eat with them, and we're going to do it with respect and dignity. It's not going to be just a soup kitchen. They invited people in. The first Sunday, 50 or 70 people came. Shortly, there were 200 people regularly coming for breakfast at this church. One of the young people said to the ministers, you know, you're upstairs doing that early worship service. It's only got about 40 people there. You might want to come downstairs and see what's going on down here in the kitchen. And so the ministers did. And that was the beginning of the most radical change I think any church has ever undergone. Because what they saw when they got there was the seed of an idea that they could see potential in. Now I'm going to take a little time out there and give you a little, we're going to break down, we'll talk a little bit about cognitive psychology, because what happened when the ministers went downstairs and saw 200 people, their own church members involved with them, was their whole frame of reference about what is the church began to change. So we know there's a concept cognitive psychologists tell us called selective perception. And let me just say a little bit about what this means. Psychologists tell us, and we know it's true, that as human beings, the only way we can efficiently function cognitively in this world is that we select stimuli that we're going to pay attention to. We pick and choose what we want to believe. So out of all the stimuli that's there, we have to figure out what can I pay attention to, because there's too much. So on a day-to-day basis, it's efficient for us. But it also is a trap, because what we know people do is we pick information that what? Is consistent with my prior held beliefs. If it's inconsistent with what I think I know is true, I'm not going to pay attention to it. In fact, I'll go to great lengths to discredit the information. I'll give you an example from my own life. I remember years ago I was living in Austin, Texas, and I worked in San Antonio. That's a long drive. It's 90 miles, it's 2 hours. And the president of the university had invited a bunch of faculty to breakfast. He was trying to get to know people. Well, I wanted to go, and I got my invitation, and the breakfast started at 7 in the morning. So if you do the math backwards, I was going to have to leave my house by 5, get up, takes me about an hour to assemble. Some of us takes longer than others. I got up at 4, so I was setting my alarm to get up at 4, and it was really important to get that alarm set. The alarm goes off, I get up, I get everything, I take the shower, I get my hair done, I'm ready to go. I get in the kitchen, and because I don't like to get in the car on an empty stomach, it's never worked that well, I got myself a little bowl of cereal. And as I'm eating, I looked at the clock on the stove, and it said 1:03. And I thought to myself, the electricity must have gone off last night. I continued to eat, and I looked at the clock on the other wall, and it said 1:04. And I said to myself, I really need to synchronize those clocks one of these days. And I continued to eat, and I saw the watch on my hand said 1:04. And that was the first point at which the information I allowed to get in that I had set the clock wrong. I had set it for midnight, and I was ready to go at 1 o'clock in the morning. It took 3 different attempts for that stimuli to get through my belief that it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. Now that's a silly example, but it's been very powerful in my life. I think about it again and again, how hard it is to accept information that we don't want to hear. So when the ministers went downstairs, back to my story, what they saw was something that didn't look like church. So what they saw was people involved in talking to people with dignity and respect. They saw one thing, and it turned them in. It suggested they take different actions. So what they did after changing what they saw was They saw a seed of an idea. So they saw respect, they saw dignity, they saw the beginning of an idea about a new kind of ministry. A doctor stepped out of line, put a table out there with the sign doctor on it in his doctor bag, began seeing people. Eventually, the church opened the day center. They had medical clinics, legal clinics, eye clinics. Lots more people in the congregation got involved. Resources. Now, some people didn't like it. The businesses around, the fancy hotels did not like that line that you saw earlier of people standing in their doorway. A lot of controversy erupted. Some people continued to leave the church, but you know what happened? Lots of other people started coming. The church started posting billboards around town that said, "No hell and judgment here." And people began to come to the church, and with it came their checkbooks. The church experienced an absolutely radical change in its experience of what it meant to be a church. The beauty of what those leaders did was they saw the idea and they said, you know, this is not a ministry to the homeless, it's a ministry with the marginalized. And when you put that language there, the marginalized, we've all been marginalized at some time or another. So all of a sudden, it was a ministry for everyone, including the homeless people and the people. They never used the word homeless. I'm using that as a shortcut. One of the things that happened is the street people felt so comfortable, they began coming upstairs and going to 11 o'clock worship. They volunteered to be in the choir. They were ushers. The whole place was changing. And it was not a change that the ministers had ever imagined, the leaders of the church. They used language in powerful ways. They had recovery groups, and people in the church, as well as the street people, came. And what the ministers would say is, we're all in recovery for something. I may be addicted to work. You may be addicted to something else. People on the streets, some of them have problems with alcohol and drugs. A powerful transformation took place in that church. So I go back to what I started with when I said those original thoughts about leadership, which are the leader's in control, the leader has the vision, the leader fixes big problems. That wasn't what happened in this situation. In fact, stress and turmoil often leads to really good new ideas. In fact, most innovations, if you track them, did not come out of a time of stability and calm waters. There was usually some turmoil or some stress or some failure that caused people to think finally outside the box and change their frame of reference. What you saw was that vision is there in the system somewhere. The leader's job more is to help surface it, and then once surfaced, give it meaning and use language to make it seem important. So my first story I wanted to tell you was about Mission Church, because it changed for me forever how I think about the role of the leader. The leader doesn't have to know it all. And the second set of experiences I want to talk about come from this building. A bit of reflection on my part about what it's been like since I've been dean here. And I'm just going to close with a couple of thoughts that come from this reflection. So I put a half of an X through this list. What you always hear is that leaders need resources, they need money, they need staff, they need technology, they need facility. All of that's sort of true. But before you can get those resources, what I've learned is the most important and valuable resource that any of us have access to, and every single person in this room possesses it, is our energy and our spirit. I started reflecting on this because people said to me, wow, you seem to have a lot of energy, or I sort of like your energy, and I've been thinking about what does that mean? And what I've come to appreciate about it is that my energy is something that I'm in control of, and I don't have to ask for it or negotiate for it or compromise for it. That's something that I manage and I'm in control of. And the same thing is true with my spirit. So I'll break those down just really quickly, what I think about what that means. I read a book that talked about, this is not my label, but I like it. The leader is the chief energy officer. I'm in charge of managing the energy of my organization. And it starts with managing my own energy. I can choose to come to work excited. I can choose to come to work in a bad mood. I can choose to come to work bored. And so for me, and I hope for you, that's good news, is that we're in charge and we manage our own energy. And one of the things about that I think ways people energize organizations is through laughter, through kind of being silly at times, through asking tough questions. So how really are we going to try to be a better college of business? What does that really mean? That's a provocative question. Don't really want to totally answer that in public, but that's what leaders do, is ask hard questions, help people feel comfortable, and I think those are some ways in which energy is infused in the organization. If I talk about spirit, what I mean by that is being my authentic self. And so if you are going to work with me and know me, you're going to know a little bit about me. You're going to know that I, like many people, have experienced enormous sorrow and enormous joy all at the same time. If you work closely to me, you'll find that out. And it shapes who I am. And I don't hide it. I tend to use I heard someone once say, you don't need very many rules in organizations. So I have basically 3. I call them the 3 T's, because you're supposed to have alliteration. That makes it, I guess if I want to write a book someday, that makes it better. The first T is transparency. That I think it's important for the leader to be upfront about what they're trying to do. I've never liked working for people who went into the back room and made side deals, and you kind of only found out halfway through what somebody else got. So I try really hard. On my best day, we're making decisions where people kind of know the framework and they know what the process is. You might not agree with the outcome, but you're going to know how we got there and why we did it. The second T is talk. I like to talk. I invite people to come talk. I invite people to the table to talk. Talking's important, because talking's how we figure out if we know anything or not. Talking's how we test ideas. So transparency, talking, and the last one is tracking. I had to just reach for that one. But what I mean by that is using data and evidence to make decisions, not just assumptions, not just, well, I don't think that'll work. Is there some information we can look at? I don't want to study it to death because I want to make the decision and move on. Transparency, talking, and tracking. So I started with the title, Leading with Spirit. What I learned from Mission Church is the leader doesn't have to know everything. The leader needs to be able to see the potential in other people's ideas. So that means listening. That means giving meaning to ideas as they begin to sprout. And when you manage with energy and spirit, those are 2 resources that every one of you, and we as women in particular, I think, have access to our own energy and our own spirit, and no one can take that from us. We're in charge of those things, and I believe that's all good news. And it's a great place to start in bringing around about big change in organizations. Thank you.